Hello and welcome to another edition of the Virtual Conference Live Talks with me, Dov Benyaacov-Kurtzman. I think never before have we had such anticipation for a guest, and quite rightly so. Louise Hayes, I met in person about 3 years, almost to the day, in a World Conference in Spain. And when I met her for the first time, for sure I'd known who she was and I'd followed her teachings, and I've been learning from her for a long time through her books and also online courses. But meeting her for the first time was quite extraordinary for me. If anyone's read my book, Mind Over Terror, I actually write about it in the book, as it was extremely emotional. The welcome that I received from her was quite surprising to me. But I realized later that that is Louise Hayes. She is a very warm, empathetic, and passionate person, passionate for people, passionate for teenagers, passionate in the work that she does. And she does immense traveling, at least in the old days when we actually got on planes and traveled to different countries. She travels quite frequently all over the world. But I think for me, one of the most fascinating things about her, and I do hope that she will talk about it today, is her relationship with the Himalayan mountains and her frequent mindful trips to there. Something that I personally would love to do, but I must admit to everybody right now, I have an extreme anxiety about whether I could actually do it or not. The thought of me being isolated up the world's highest mountain, or any other mountain for that matter, brings me a lot of anxiety and I suppose a lot of emotional avoidance. But that aside, this is not about me, it's not about therapy, it's about Louise Hayes. And Louise Hayes, I'm going to let, as I always do, my guests introduce themselves, because I could never do them as much justice. And I want Louise to actually introduce and tell us what she's been up to recently. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Louise to come in from the green room and join us. But as usual, please put your comments, questions, anything you'd like to say in the comments, and I will get them over to Louise. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Louise into the virtual conference. Hi, Louise, and welcome to the virtual conference.
Hi, Dov. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I'm sure you're talking about someone else, but thank you.
No, definitely talking about you. And so, first of all, what time is it in Australia right now?
It's 9:30 p.m.
Okay, so it's late at night. All right. So, as you heard, I'm fascinated with lots of things that you do. You have quite a wide range, and but why don't you give a short introduction of who you are, what you're about, and what you're doing these days for those in the audience listening and watching you.
Thanks, Dov. I'm a clinical psychologist and academic and author, and obviously I do some speaking and training as well. I divide my time between working in private practice and then also doing training in acceptance and commitment therapy and writing. So that's pretty much what I normally do. But then there's also a big chunk of my time where I do spend time in the Himalaya, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's my favourite topic. I can talk about that forever. And what I've been doing lately is staring at a computer.
Right, yeah,
pretty much.
Absolutely. We've all got increased screen time going on. And the funny thing about it, I think, ironically, is up until this period, we were all kind of, in one way or another, trying to encourage people to decrease their screen time and mix more physically and socially with other human beings, which is what human beings need. And ironically, the world kind of shut down on us from certain respects, and we've now all been spending our time on screens to actually,
To
come into
connect,
contact
yes.
with other human beings.
Yeah, so I've been spending a lot of my time doing telehealth with clients. And when I'm not doing telehealth, of course, then we're talking to people like yourself on screens, or talking to family, or doing, we've been playing family trivia quiz games and things like that. So, we're all online all the time for one thing or another, but aren't we lucky that we can get online?
Well, absolutely. So what I was going to ask you before we actually get into, your client group and your speciality, the one thing that's quite, I think, unique about what we're all going through is the fact that we're all going through it, no matter where we are in the world. It's something that's really affecting everybody simultaneously at the same time. It's not like it's in one place and then a few years later it comes to another place. We're all actually going through it, whether you're a therapist, whether you're a client, whether you're just person in the street, whether you're working, whether you're not working. It's it's raining on everybody right now. Before we get into any kind of the reason why I invited you along, apart from the fact that everybody seems to love you, and I do too, and I really respect your work, your knowledge and your experience, and that brings a certain wisdom that you can pass over to the people that I'm concerned about, the ones that are watching this. But before that, you're also going through it, right? So how do you personally cope with what's going on in Australia?
Well, I think what you point to, Dov, is really interesting. We are all going through it at the same time. And it's interesting when I'm working with clients, because we really share a common ground. We're all going through exactly the same thing. We have variation, of course, but it's unusual in that we're all sitting here in the same space. And what I've been speaking to my clients about, and the thing that I've noticed the most, is that every day is different. Some days I'm quite like, I can do this. I quite like being home. I can do this. And then other days it's like, oh, do I have to do this again? And every day is like a roller coaster. So it's up and down, and we're all up and down. And I think as long as we make space for the idea that we'll be up and down and that every day will be different, we'll mostly be okay.
Yeah, it's difficult for all of us, I think, in certain respects.
Yes, and as the different things happen, as family problems happen, as you know, we were supposed to do this a week ago, and I had a family problem and cancelled at the last minute. And you were so gracious to let me do that. But that's sometimes what we need to do at the moment, is we need to decide what's the important thing to do right now. And it was pretty hard for me to call you 5 minutes before or 10 minutes before and say, sorry, I've got a family issue, I need to cancel. But I made the decision that was the thing that I needed to do, because in that moment, that was the most important thing to do. So I think being flexible is kind of what we really need to do the most.
Yeah, I think that was a big lesson for both of us, even, is, we're both people that make commitments. We know what, committed action is, but sometimes, and this is a great example of it that you brought up, is that, there's in our values and things that are important to us, sometimes we just need to, say no, or postpone and do something that's urgent and really important. And, you said we have to be flexible, and it was very difficult for you to actually make that call for me. But from me being on the other side, I think it's also a lesson. And it's a lesson, I could easily have, well, oh my goodness, people have, I've invited all these people to the party, and the main guest is not coming. It's going to be a disaster for me. But I chose to respond actually very differently, as you know, and to come and be compassionate and have that flexibility and just inform everybody and say, look, it's not happening. And hopefully it will happen again in the future. And here it's happening now. And just, that's the way life is. Sometimes things just come in, whether it's a cancellation, or whether, like before, just 2 minutes before we went on air now, I started having technical problems, because that can just happen in the world, especially so we're so reliant on technology now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And my microphone can easily just conk out any minute now. I don't know if it's going to last the program or not, but it's about
We just got to roll with it, really.
going on in my head while I'm smiling to you. But it's about, that's life, isn't it? It's that roller coaster that we're on. And if we learn to actually, ride the ride, then we're going to have at least a reasonably managed life. And if we don't, then there's always that fear of falling off, because we're not, learning to ride the roller coaster properly. What do you think about that?
Well, I think things are hard enough as they are. We're worried about our loved ones. Some of us have loved ones that are unwell, or real concerns for their health. Other people have concerns about finances and how to survive. And I think those things are big enough that the everyday things, like a sudden change of an appointment, we need to be flexible about that stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, no one's flexible straight away. It's in the first 5 minutes you have a bit of a panic, then after that's like, it's okay. I think those small things, if we can be flexible around them, it's really good too, because we're all in this huge big thing. And you know what? Actually, I've found so many people are kind, especially my clients that I've been working with. They are flexible around problems with the internet, or if the signal we're talking about goes a little bit, sometimes the screen is a bit blurry. I'm so happy about how flexible clients have been. And of course, it's not as good doing therapy online as it is face-to-face. The research shows you get good outcomes. The research shows the data is good. But we all know that sitting with a real person is kind of nicer than sitting with a virtual person.
Yes.
It's just a little bit of a difference. But people have been really flexible about it, and really understanding and kind about what we need to do. And I think that's great.
So your client group, is it mainly teenagers then, or is it more than that?
No, I see adults too. I see adults and teenagers.
Right. But your speciality, if I'm not mistaken, and the books that you've written are geared towards your work with teenagers. Is that right?
Yeah, my career started working with adolescents and children and parents, actually,
Right.
and then most of my client work is either adolescents or adults. But my research, treatment, development things have been on therapy for young people, helping young people with therapy. I think it's a really important area that's often neglected. We often do a lot of work around adult work. And even if you look at the number of books that are published and written around therapy, or the number of research trials that are written around therapy, they're mostly for adults. There's like this many for young people and this many for adults.
Right.
So I think it's really nice to see people who do the work with young people. We need lots more of it.
And you authored a specific way of getting all your information over to adolescents, which you call DNAV. I've been learning that myself and trying to introduce that to schools when schools were open. Maybe say a few words about that and how that might be advantageous for us, for the people watching even. And remember, the people watching are a mix of general public, but also people that are ACT enthusiasts, but also professionals as well.
Sure. So most of my work has been trying to understand human development. And development happens all across life. We don't actually just kind of finish when we get to 21. Excuse me for a minute. And as part of that, and my work with adolescents, we began looking at something called acceptance and commitment therapy, and that was originally developed for adults. And we began looking at ways that we could think about a developmental way of doing that work. And that required us to look deeper at the theoretical implications and the assumptions we make about growth and development. and to really think deeply about what it is that is important in understanding development. And we did that from like early age, like birth, and thinking about how we grow and what changes our adaptation, what changes how we adapt to the environment that we're in, and how do we grow at our best. And then through that, when I say we, I'm talking about myself and my co-author, Joseph Cherokee. We came up with a developmental model of ACT that we called DNAV. And it's a model that looks at how we can help people to grow and thrive, which is what we need to do right now, really, isn't it?
It's right now. So exactly what I'm finding now in the people that I come into contact with, particularly parents of adolescents as well, is that there's a mixture of kind of experiences that are going on in the house just now with adolescents. So you have the adolescents who are, you know, just like everybody else, on lockdown, on quarantine, not going out, trying to contact their friends via screen time or whatever. But then what's happening is the parents and the teenagers, or the adolescents, even if they're a bit older than teenagers, are spending 24 hours, 7 days a week now in the same kind of submarine, you know, and that submarine might be very small or it might be a little bit bigger, but they're all there with each other all the time. And so, you know, typical adolescents, they don't like being kind of screened all the time by their parents. And the parents are now noticing, wait a minute, you're not getting up till 11 o'clock in the morning, or you're not going to bed at, you know, the same time as us. And we understand you're on your phone all day or all night. And that kind of friction starts to happen. That's one, scenario. Another scenario is that the teenagers, particularly the ones that are in high school, getting close to maybe finishing high school, you know, their whole routine has been, school's basically stopped. They don't know if their exams are going to take place, not take place, what's happening with university next year or in a couple of years' time. There's a lot of catastrophizing, if that's the word. Their whole world has just been destroyed because, you know, their future is totally uncertain. And that brings a lot of tension into the household. And then there's a third scenario, which they're going outside, they're mixing with their friends, they're not particularly bothered about that. But when they come home, there's that fear in the household that they might be bringing back some, deadly virus and infecting the other members of the household. So they're not really getting a good deal, really, at the moment. I think teenagers, they might even be getting a lot of bad press, because when people see them congregating in little groups outside, there's all this kind of, oh my goodness, how can you be doing that? We're not supposed to be doing that kind of socializing at the moment. And if they don't do that, they're getting this extra kind of under the microscope thing from their parents that maybe they're not, acting like adults, right? So how can we use your skills and knowledge and wisdom to, maybe there's a lot of low tolerance going on just now. There's a lot of high irritability in everybody, which is causing this tension. Our mutual friend, Professor Tom Tsubo, when he was involved in the Ebola crisis, and he was on the virtual conference with me at the very beginning of this whole crisis, warned very carefully of adverse child experiences that might be increasing because of this, just because of the things that I've just mentioned so far. So, what kind of skills can we try to go over to people, even in this very short time, on how to manage that?
Okay. Well, what I thought about as you spoke, Dov, is that part of our model, we talk about the way that we use our language or our ability to think and tell ourselves. And we call it giving yourself advice, or your advisor. So we actually put a name to it. So what we humans do is we have like our own advisor that tells us, like something sitting on your shoulder telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And what I heard when you were speaking there, Dov, is very much what an adult advisor sounds like and what an adult parent advisor sounds like. You know, the telling ourselves that this will be terrible, that our kids need to do this and they need to do that, and worry and fear and all the things that we tell ourselves about what will happen. Now, I'm in Australia, and 4 months ago, just in December, we spent 3 months under a cloud of smoke. Pretty much most of the eastern seaboard was under a cloud of smoke. Right. And the advice that we were giving ourselves then was nothing like what's happening now. So just in a very short space of time, things change a lot. So the interesting thing about the way we give ourselves advice and talk to ourselves is that we make an assumption that we can actually predict what's going to happen. And an adult, a parent, for example, parents are good to talk about. Parents start very early trying to predict what's going to happen because that's their job, to look after their child, you know. When you have a 2-year-old, you're constantly predicting if they've got enough sleep, have they had enough food, and you're always predicting what they need to do next. And then when they get to be teenagers, things change, right? Our job is to step aside from some of those predictions a little bit and let our teenagers make some decisions for themselves. That's really hard for a parent advisor, right? Because your advisor's job is to keep you alive and keep you safe, like to tell you this might go wrong, Dov, that might go wrong, this might go wrong, right? And the thing we care about the most is our children and what might go wrong for them. So right now, parents are understandably thinking, what about this, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Then the important thing is to pause for a moment and know that we actually can't predict what's going to happen. That's one thing. And we always, as adults, predict in a different way to the way that young people do, right? So young people have different needs to what we do. So one of the key tasks of adolescence is socialising. It's a key developmental task. Absolutely. And adolescents need to socialise often. And if you think across history, you know, like in the 50s and 60s, adolescents might have socialised by hanging around the local milk bar, we'd call it in Australia, the local store. I don't know what you call it in other countries, but they'd hang around those places.
Coffee shop, cafe,
coffee shop, yeah, cafe, those kind of things. And then then they hung around the drive-in in the 70s, and then in the 80s, they started to hang around in shopping centres. And as we've continued, now they hang around online. So by the time we get to the decade that we're in now, often there's not a lot of face-to-face hanging around after school. Often kids go home, young people go home, or they have activities, you know, like extracurricular activities. And a lot of the time, their hanging around happens online.
Right.
That's without coronavirus. So the most important thing is teenagers need other teenagers, and this has always happened. You know, if you think about yourself, what did you do as a teenager? Where did you hang out with as a teenager with other teenagers?
Okay, so you've brought that back to me actually, and I've got something interesting I want to say about what you're saying, which is kind of a light bulb thing for me. When I was a teenager, I lived in a house that we had a massive wood behind our house. We kind of joined onto a woodland. And we were all in there. We were always in the woodland, whether we were climbing trees, depending on what age we were either climbing trees. We were, you know, associating with each other. Some of us were smoking cigarettes where we shouldn't be doing.
I was going to say that's what I was doing. Smoking cigarettes.
A lot of that going on as well. And so, but that was kind of our playground. And we were always out. Always. I mean, we were hardly ever in the house. So we were always either in the street, in the wood, till it gets dark. And our parents usually said to us, you know, come home when it gets dark. And then I grew up in Scotland as a teenager, so it didn't get dark till almost midnight in the summer anyway. And we usually were late too. And so that's kind of where I hung out. What's interesting is what you said here, which I actually never thought of before, and I'm sure lots of parents haven't thought of, is that online is that new woods, is that new mall. So it's not just that they're spending so much time on screens. That's their place. I didn't
That's their
actually
place.
think about that before.
That's their place. And often, depending on where you live and the culture that you live in, often the public places, adolescents are disparaged for hanging around in those places. If they hang out in shopping centres, they're often shooed away. So if we see them in public, sometimes they're chased away and they're not allowed to hang around in groups. Or maybe before they did hang out in the woods or wherever. But online is the place that they hang out. Now, they do need to manage that. You can't be online all the time. No one can be. But the most important thing is to think about the developmental needs of a young person, and being social and socialising is almost the number one thing that they need. The task in adolescence is to learn how to be a social species in a group of people. If you think about younger children, they spend most of their time with their family. And as you get older, 12, 13, 14, your horizons broaden and you start to look more social, and then you'll become more a social being in the world. And that's what adolescents are doing. Now, they don't always do it well. I didn't. We both just laughed about smoking out in the woods in your case, or outside the store in my case. They don't always do it well, and they make mistakes, and they need parental boundaries to kind of help them with that. And it's a kind of an each way give and take, but they do need to socialise. So I think online coronavirus is a tricky thing for young people in that way, and they will need to make up that socialising time online. It doesn't mean online all day and all night. And I know that it is tricky. I know that there's lots of young people who are on their phones all the way through their lessons. It's really complicated and really tricky.
And should parents, getting it right down to what's happening now on a day-to-day basis, it can be during this corona crisis, it can also be out with it. But how should parents actually handle this? I mean, should they put lots of boundaries down and say, look, you can do what you want, but only between these hours and these hours? Or should it be whatever you need to do? How should parents communicate? Or what skills could we teach a parent right now, and how to improve that communication?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think there's one answer. Well, there's one thing that's important, but I don't think there's one answer, because what a parent might do for a 13-year-old versus a 17-year-old, it's very different. But there is one really important thing. So my PhD was in this area of parenting adolescents, actually, a long time ago. But and I continued to follow the research. The research shows that the most important thing that gets your young person through adolescence is the relationship they have with you. Full stop.
Wow.
Right? So we as parents, the most important thing...
I really want to stop you, because it's really important that after you've made that very clear statement, because a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of parents experience what might be on the face of it the opposite from their teenagers. My teenager doesn't want to talk to me. They're very rude to me. They're not disciplined with me. They're kind of, they don't get that feedback from their teenagers that relationship is the most important thing. Although I do believe that it is. It's just that is on the surface, but I could be wrong.
Well, the research shows it is. The research shows that adolescents who have a good relationship with their parents, who are well attached, who feel supported by their parents, they are the ones who find it that they get through the adolescent period better than ones who struggle with their relationship. Now, the thing is, and I say this to parents a lot, don't be tricked by that they might be rude to you, or that they might, not tell you anything. Don't assume that that's the parent advisor, right? Giving yourself advice that they don't care about me anymore. They do care about you, and they do need you as a parent. And they need their friends too, but they need you as well, and they need you for different things, right? And so sometimes, so the research kind of shows that adolescents will often talk to their parents about important decisions. So they're going to talk to their friends about, their friends and socialising and hair and clothes and rock bands and those things. But when it comes to important decisions, if they've got a good relationship with you, they'll talk to their parents. So the other part of it is that sometimes adolescents you might have trouble with the relationship with adolescents at home. They might not want to clean their room or not want to do their chores, or they might be grumpy, or and if you think about what they're doing and what the task of adolescence is, the task of adolescence is to kind of push the boundaries as far as they can to learn how to be an adult, right? So if you want to learn how to be an adult, then sometimes you'll push those boundaries as far as you can to try to learn where the tolerance is and where you should go. And the place where they push it is against you as a parent, right? Because that's where they can.
That's the safest place you're supposed to be able to do it, isn't it?
Yeah. So the safest place to push those boundaries is at home, and then parents push back, and over time you learn, okay, I can't do that. That's not what I can do. So the relationship, so when I say the relationship is important, I don't mean you can't provide discipline or boundaries. And what I do mean is there should be some time every day when the relationship is you being together. And I know that's hard at the moment with parents all locked down in a house. We kind of are all together, but not necessarily all together in a way that we always want. But I try to encourage parents to try to make some time each day to be together with your adolescent, where you're not giving them instructions and where you're not telling them what to do, and where you're not saying, have you done your homework, and what are you going to study at university, but just hang out together, sit on the sofa and watch a television show with them for half an hour, or something they like, or chop the vegetables together, or just go for a walk together if you can. Or it doesn't have to be a long period of time. Sit down and have a cup of tea together, or something that is your family routine, and try to make that little bit of time just to be, even if you're not talking, which is often something that happens too. So, I mean, of course, one of the things that before coronavirus, one of the things that used to happen is parents would drive somewhere with their teenager. And driving was often a really good way to kind of be together for a little bit. And it doesn't mean you need to be asking them questions. That's probably a really important thing, is don't make that the time to, I've got all alone. I'm going to ask them all the questions I want to ask them. It means just to kind of be together. That's how you build relationships. Is just to be together with no pressure. And then as a parent,
okay, so we just experienced a little internet problem with at your side, Louise.
Okay, am I back?
But yeah, I got that last bit of not asking them too many questions. I think what you're saying, just to summarize a little bit, while there was a little bit of a disconnection there, which was great for me, because I think parents, one of the problems that they have today is that there's not a lot of clear messages out there of what the best practice is to be a parent with adolescents. And what you're coming across with is quite a clear message, and that message is know your place in the relationship of being, that person that they might come to, if there's a good relationship, to make important decisions. I mean, that's a great task, a great position to be in. You are in the position to know that you're part of the game of their testing boundaries, and that friction is actually part of that learning process. So they're pushing one way, you're kind of either allowing them or not allowing them according to where you think the boundaries are best. And it's that, pushing back, exactly. And not to be afraid to push back, but do it with I would say even a kind and compassionate way. Know that, because I was talking to a parent the other day, and they were saying, well, should I just let them do anything they want? And well, no, there's down the boundaries, but know that they're going to be tested. I think that is what you're saying, and I think that's a great way of positioning yourself as a parent is know that you will be tested. That's part of the process. And I think that takes that, insulting bit out of it.
Well, that's right. If you think that what they're trying to do is learn how to be an adult, and that's a pretty tough job, right?
Yeah.
And none of us really do adulting very well, And as adults, we can yell and scream and slam doors and do all those things and sulk and do all those things as well when we're not having a good day. So if you think about what it means to be a teenager when you've got all of the developmental things happening and the hormones changing and all of those things going on, and emotions are like a roller coaster, then you're going to have up and down days. So relationship first, and then it is really important to have some boundaries and to have some rules, but not too many. And they need to change as the person gets older. The rules and boundaries you have with a 13-year-old are not going to be the same as with a 17-year-old. And so things have changed quite a lot, because the number one thing I used to say to parents is know where they are and know who they're with. Right? But now you know where they are. You might not know who they're with because they're online with someone, but you certainly know where they are.
Would you say if there's multiple age groups of teenagers in the house that it's okay to have certain boundaries for one but not for the other? Because they'll be, but they're doing it. My big brother, he's allowed, to do whatever, but I'm not. So you would just explain, that this is how it's divided up. It's they're in a different age group than you, and so on. Is that the way you would suggest it?
Yeah, what you're describing, Dov, is sometimes it's just not fun being a parent. It's just not. But of course, everyone has different needs. So fair does not mean everyone gets the same. They say it's not fair. Fair does not mean everyone gets the same. Fair means everyone gets what they need. Right? And as a parent, your job is to decide what, or to work with your young person to decide what they might need. And as a parent, you might also decide that your 13-year-old is not ready for the adult movies yet. And that's the tough part about being a parent, is the relationship is important. The number one thing is your relationship with them, but you're not their friend, you're their parent. And that's not the same thing. And sometimes I say to parents, we all have people in our lives that create boundaries around us. I say this to young people too. I don't get to do whatever I want. I have people around me that I know they're in the back of my mind. And if I do the wrong thing, I'll think, they won't be happy with me if I do that. So I don't think it changes when you're a teenager to when you're an adult. None of us get to do whatever we want.
I think what we've discussed today is crystal clear, and I think it's very, very helpful and will be helpful going forward. Just to, especially for a parent, and it's parents basically, or adults that are watching this more than adolescents, although I could be surprised. Of a clear, you never know, a clear message of, how to maybe manage it a little bit better. But before we go, I'm not letting you go. I'm really sorry, without trying to bring a little bit of Himalayas into our conversation.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Maybe even bring something back from there to pass over to, I don't know if that's possible, but even metaphorically to pass over to these viewers who've been watching you up until now, something that can just help them as we eventually leave them today.
I can absolutely do that. So I spend a fair bit of time in Nepal, and I take health professionals to Nepal, and we run trips, and we do that for lots of reasons. We teach professionals about mindfulness in places where mindfulness was created, the Himalaya, and we learn what it means to be mindful for days, day in and day out, and to be mindful not just of ourselves, but other people as a group. So it's not just inside us, but it's mindful of ourselves as a group of people together, and ourselves in the world, and ourselves with nature around us. So that's what we do. But what's interesting right now is to talk about why we do that. So I was in the Kathmandu when the earthquake happened in 2015. They had that earthquake that killed, I think, 10,000 people. And it was after the earthquake that we thought, well, we want to do something to help. And so we decided that we would run some treks as a way of helping staff get money and raising some funds. But what happened in that time immediately after the earthquake is I was working doing psychological first aid after the earthquake, and you would know this from your work in Manchester, Dov. I was doing psychological first aid after the earthquake, and we were using the DNAV Developmental Model of ACT to try to help people. And there's a part of the DNAV that we call the discoverer. D stands for discoverer. Discoverer is simply a word that describes trying new things and testing things out and seeing what happens. And what we found out in the crisis is we helped people discover and try and test things out. And small actions and things that they tested out, for example, a family who'd lost their house, and a neighbour gave them, like their house crumbled and fell down, and the neighbour might give them a small bag of rice, right? And so that might be the little discoverer active hope action that the neighbour might do, is give them a little bag of rice. And what we found is those actions of actually finding something to do changed how the people were able to cope with it. And I think there's a good lesson for us here, right? Finding things that you can do, that you can take action on. Active hope, I've been calling it in these times. It's remarkable how it can help us cope in difficult times. So a little bag of rice doesn't change the fact that the person lost their house, but it makes the giver and the receiver feel better and change, right? And so what I've been doing with my clients and what I've been talking about in the work that I've been doing is trying hard to help people find ways to take some actions. They might not know what it's going to be about or what it's going to do, and it might feel small and tiny, but try something and see what happens. See if you can take a new step, something new and different that you haven't done before. It doesn't have to be big. You know, one thing it might be for a parent, for example, might be to sit and read a book for an hour. I know that parents are really busy at the moment. I know that. And some parents might go, oh, I don't have time for that. And I'm not saying I'm just saying that as a way of pointing out that it doesn't have to be that you're going to go and, do a gym workout for 40 minutes online. I mean, just trying to do something. And often if the discover action that you do connects to other people, that can be really helpful, right? So it might be make a phone call, but something new and different can be really useful. And in these times, in these hard times, it's not just, it's difficult and horrible. I'm not trying to make it a good thing, but in these hard times, there are things we discover we didn't know we had. Right? And we will learn and grow, and there will be things we learn and grow here. We just don't know what they are. And there will be many sad things too, of course, that we have to learn how to carry and live with, and people we lose and things that happen to us. But there will also be parts of us and some of us that grow and discover new things. So I think understanding that allows us to take some action and to try some things that we might not have tried before and see what happens. And so then you've got your advisor telling you it's terrible, and then you've got your ability to discover and try something new, right? And see if you can train your advisor that things aren't always what you predict.
I think that's very beautiful, and it reminds me of something that I've been talking about for 2 months now, is that my next door neighbour, up until this whole era, to be quite honest, didn't really have much connection with them, and I didn't feel that I needed. But as it happens, she, the mother of the house, bakes bread every Friday. And one day during this whole crisis, I get a call from my next door neighbour to ask if I like bread, and I eat bread. Well, I don't. I try to cut down. So they said, okay, because my wife bakes bread every Friday, and she thought of you. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. And so I kind of, went into that discover mode, and I thought, you know what? I said, maybe a little bit, just to. So she bakes me particularly small loaf of bread, really, really. And every weekend I get a ring on because it's all contactless now, right? So I get a little call and I go to my front door and it's been placed outside my front door. Now, it's first of all, it's very tasty and it's gorgeous and all that, and that's really nice. But the connection, not the bread. The bread was just a medium. The bread was just a thing. But the connection that I have with the family next door now, and I'm living on my own during this whole. I don't see my children. I can't see my mother, and so on. Is immense. Just through that small, deliberate action of baking that, I know that somebody's thinking about me. I know that she considered me, and that she's even delivered it to my front door. It's absolutely incredible, and so I really understand what you're saying. I think that is beautiful. I really
That's
do.
a lovely story, Dov. And the thing is, when you take that bread, you're helping her too.
Absolutely, I fully believe
it's not
that.
just you that's benefiting;
Yeah.
she's benefiting
Yeah.
too. So sometimes it's in the small things that we do, and sometimes you don't know until after you've done it, and you think, "Wow, that was really nice." So the thing about being a discoverer sometimes is to just try some new and different things that might be a bit out of your comfort zone to what you normally do, and some you'll find will work okay, and some you won't. Right? But we don't know until we try.
Wonderful, beautiful. So just before we close off, we've got Lilach from Israel saying she likes the idea of that relationship first thing that you were bringing with the teenagers, really important, and she totally agrees with you. Louise Hayes, it's been absolutely divine talking to you. I've really, really loved it, appreciated it, and enjoyed it, which is great talking to you. I've got no doubt that I'm going to get a lot of feedback now from our viewers, whether it's they've been watching on live on Facebook or YouTube, or whether they're going to be watching the replay. The best thing I can do is to wish you the best of health and the best of success and everything that you're continue to do. And Louise Hayes, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Dov. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I wish you the best of health too, and the people that are listening as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.